If you're owing taxes to the government can appoint any other person that is holding onto your money, it could be your bank or anyone else, as your agent for the purpose of collecting your taxes. But in this video, I want to give you the truth, the fact actually, the full picture, that the government can in fact deduct taxes from the bank account. Hey guys, welcome again. In this video, I'm going to be addressing a question that so many Nigerians have been asking. You can already think about what that question is, you can guess. It's the question about whether the government can in fact deduct taxes from the bank account. Well, the simple answer is yes, they can. They very well can. The law gives them the powers to do so. But in this video, I want to give you the truth, the fact actually, the full picture. Now, this provision is not a new provision, just to set the background. It has always existed even in the old laws. Section 31 of the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act always provided something called the power of substitution. So it means that if you're owing taxes to the government can appoint any other person that is holding onto your money, it could be your bank or anyone else, as your agent for the purpose of collecting your taxes. But you see, this provision has been there from 2007, but I don't think you've ever heard that the government deducted money from anybody's bank account at source. But that doesn't mean that they will not do it now. They can actually, in fact, do it now. And I actually see the government taking those steps, particularly for people who are owing a lot of taxes. But let me tell you really how this thing is meant to work. The government will not just go straight into appointing the banks and telling them to deduct your money and pay. No. There is a process that leads to that final step. That process is what I want to explain to you in this video. Now, Nigeria operates something called the self-assessment tax system, where as an individual or as a business, you have the obligation to report your income to the government on your own, calculate your tax by yourself, and pay the tax. Now, the government can, within 6 years, audit you and say, I want to check whether what you really declared is the truth, whether the taxes you paid are in fact the correct taxes you should have paid. They have the right to do that, but you have the primary duty to report your income yourself, calculate your tax, and pay. Now, when the government has now done an audit and they think that you owe more taxes than you have paid, or the government has not even received any tax filing from you. Let's say you've decided not to file your tax returns, you decided not to pay your taxes, and the government decides that this guy, based on our assessments, actually should pay taxes. What they would do is, in those two scenarios where they think you should pay more taxes than you have paid, or they think you should pay taxes and you haven't paid at all, they would issue something called a notice of assessment to you as a business owner or as an individual, to your business. And they would say, this is how much taxes we think you owe. Now, you have a duty as a company or as a business owner or as an individual to respond to that notice of assessment by the tax authority. And what you're meant to do is to tell them, oh, I have received your letter. You've told me this is how much I owe, but I do not agree. And you state your objection, saying you do not agree with the tax assessment that they have given. And then state what your own position is. It could be that the government is making a mistake. So you give them your own position and you substantiate it with evidence supporting your position. Now, what happens is, if you respond to the government with something called a letter of objection, you have to respond within 30 days. That's the law. When you receive that letter, within 30 days of receiving that letter from the government, you must respond within 30 days. If you respond within 30 days, the government tax authority, that's either the Nigeria Revenue Service or the state tax authority, they have 90 days to also respond to you. And their response could be either of two things. They can say, okay, I agree with what you have said. So we would revise the assessment and we would say, either you don't owe us taxes anymore, or we will reduce the assessment based on what you have now provided. So your taxes are going to be less. They could take that position. Or they could take the position where they say, no, I do not agree with your calculation. Based on this additional information you've given to me in your objection letter, I still do not agree with you. And when that happens, the government gets to issue something called a notice of refusal to amend assessment. That means they are refusing to amend the original assessment they sent to you despite your objection. They have 90 days to do that. Now, when the government issues you that notice of refusal to amend assessment, it is called a NORA for short. You as a taxpayer, you have a duty to go to court. At that point, you then go to the tax appeal tribunal to dispute that notice of refusal to amend. Now, usually what happens is when the government issues you a notice of refusal to amend, they would also issue a demand notice, demanding that you pay the tax that they have already assessed. So you have 30 days from when you receive that NORA or the demand notice, whichever one you have received. You have 30 days to go to the tax appeal tribunal to dispute that assessment. And once you have gone to court to dispute the assessment, that really is the beginning of a tax dispute. And until that matter is decided, you don't have to pay any tax. Now, there are some conversations around having to deposit 20% of the assessment before you can. No, because I don't want to keep this video too long, I would make another video explaining truly whether you need to pay any deposit for your appeal to be heard at the tax appeal tribunal. But you can take it from me. Simple answer is that no, you don't need to. But I'll give you broader context based on the decisions of the court on this matter, because it is not the first time that this provision is coming up. It has always been in the old laws, but the courts have at least 4 decisions held that that provision is illegal, so it can't even apply. So you go to court, and as long as you are in court, you don't need to pay anything until that matter is determined by every court up to the Supreme Court. And that's when, if you get to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court says you are owing taxes, that's when the government can now take steps to recover the taxes from you. But what happens if the government sends you that original assessment in step 1 and you refuse to respond within 30 days? Now, under the law, if you do not respond within 30 days of receiving that assessment, the law says that that assessment will become final and conclusive after 30 days if you do not respond. And when it becomes final and conclusive, it means that that money has become a debt that you, the taxpayer, is owing the government, and the government can now take steps to recover that tax as a debt. Bear in mind, it only becomes a debt when it has become final and conclusive, and it only becomes final and conclusive when you have refused to respond to the tax assessment within 30 days. So it is at that point when it has become final and conclusive and has become a debt to the government that the government can now appoint your bank or any other person to pay that tax on your behalf, because at that point you are owing the government. So what should you do as a taxpayer? Whenever you receive any notice of assessment or any kind of documentation from the government, do not just keep it in one folder and forget about it and ignore them. That's not the right thing to do. Speak to a tax consultant, and they would be able to advise you on the steps you can take to comply. I hope that with these few points of mine, I've been able to explain to you really how this power of substitution works. So in summary, yes, the government can deduct money from your account, but there are a lot of steps that need to be followed before that happens. So watch out for subsequent videos. If you really like the kinds of things we share, in this series, we'd welcome you to subscribe to our channel, follow us on social media, and you would get a lot of information, valuable information, unbiased, balanced, professional view, coming from a wealth of experience as someone who has practiced tax for almost 10 years in Nigeria. See you in the next video.